So it is my pleasure now to introduce the first presenter of the 2023 Fellowship Symposium, Steve Wright. Steve is the Director of Horticulture and Curator of Plant Collections at Jenkins. So Steve, I'll invite you to share your screen.
Okay, can you hear me, Amy?
I can hear you, yes.
All right, great. Well, thank you for the introduction. And as Amy said, I will be giving you a little bit of history and background about the fellowship program, and then I'll turn it over to our current fellows to tell you more. The fellowship is called the Hamilton Fellowship because it has been supported by Mrs. Hamilton since its inception. For the first 10 years of the program, it was supported on a year-to-year basis. And then in the 10th year, she decided to endow the positions in perpetuity. So since then, she has passed on, and we are forever grateful for her contributions. The fellowship is in its 23rd year now. It started in the year 2000, and the Arboretum has grown in many ways in those 23 years. But at that time, there was very little staff. In fact, there was only a director and one horticulturist, and that horticulturist actually started the year before in 1999. So times were pretty lean, and the fellowship was a way for our leadership at the time to get more boots on the ground, to get more people in the garden, to get more help in the garden. So seen here are that first fellow and our head horticulturist at that time. Like the garden, the fellowship itself has evolved quite a bit over the years, going from what was primarily a gardener position in the early days to what is now a pretty intense, fully immersive horticultural and educational opportunity. So we've done that in many ways, but it was primarily with the addition of two main academic components that were added in 2014. The first of them is what we call our lunchtime talks. So these are programs that fellows develop, and they present to our volunteers and our staff on Thursday mornings. Because these are in-house presentations, they tend to be fairly informal, and we're very open about the topics that the fellows choose to present, as long as they're somehow related to horticulture or gardening in some way. So the main goal of the lunchtime talks is really just to allow the fellows to gain more experience in public speaking. A secondary goal of these lunchtime talks is to encourage more in-depth learning about a topic that those fellows are interested in, because research has shown that retention of information significantly increases if you are teaching it to other people. The second and much more substantial academic component of the fellowship is the fellow project. So every year, the fellows are required to complete a project that fits both the needs of the Arboretum and their own personal interests. So usually these are very large projects that take the better part of 2 years to complete. And so far, nearly all of them have involved a major garden improvement. So this was one of our first fellow projects. This is the Browning Hillside, and it was the fellow project of Madison Purcell. Her project was to reforest a stretch of land that had been previously mowed grass. And so she started planting trees and shrubs in that space. And we realized that we'd have to mow around all of those trees and shrubs. So as sort of a second wave of her project, she decided that we should fill up the rest of the space with really aggressive wildflowers that would support bees and butterflies. And so here she is standing among a patch of what became her favorite plants, Pycnanthemum muticum, or the clustered mountain mint. And over time, we actually all sort of fell in love more with these herbaceous plants than we did the trees and shrubs. And now we're actually talking about possibly removing some of those trees and shrubs in order to further encourage the establishment of this meadow type space. Another project was a pond edge and bog redesign. So here we are redesigning the bog, replanting, and it also included a floating bog. But it's really more than just those two things. We make a very conscious effort to provide as much as we can to our fellows. The way I see it, the goal of the fellowship is really to provide a diverse experience. one that allows those emerging horticulturists an opportunity to develop their skills and to discover their passions. And I think that's important because many of our fellows come here not really knowing exactly where they're going. They know they're interested in horticulture, they're interested in plants, but they don't know where it's going to lead. And so hopefully over the course of the 2 years that they're here, they discover what it is that excites them. So in addition to doing the project and the lunchtime talks, fellows are given opportunities to gain experience in many other things. And one of those ways is volunteer management. So this is one of our fellows managing a project to redesign out front of our deer exclusion fence. They also learned a little bit about integrated pest management, a little bit about silviculture and kind of managing light conditions, managing a forest, to get the results that we might want for a space. They get a little bit of exposure to dendrology or tree identification. This is something that we're actively working on right now as we continue expanding out into other areas of the Arboretum that have never been cataloged before. So we're having to figure out how to identify all of those trees. They get a little bit of experience in natural lands or ecological restoration, where we have to identify, remove a lot of invasive species, and then figure out ways to replant and reforest and manage the space so that those invasives don't just return. We do have a very small apiary. I think it's 3 hives at this point. Karen there in the middle is our head horticulturist, and she manages the hives. And she has what they call bee club. After work, a couple of times a month, they will go out, check on the bees, and really do whatever is necessary. And they also collect the honey. We process the honey in-house. And so that's a fun experience for fellows to be involved in too. The fellows will gain experience in plant propagation. We have been working on a yearly schedule so that every month the fellows will get experience with a different type of propagation, whether that's cuttings or seeds, possibly even grafting. In many cases, the fellow projects require some site analysis, and part of the site analysis is a soil test. And so often we will go out and collect soil samples, learn about how to properly collect the sample, how to properly process that sample, send it off for evaluation, and then we get the results back and figure out what we need to do to that space to plant the plants that we want. Fellows do get a little bit of experience with plant records. This has evolved a lot over the years as our systems have gotten better and more efficient, and we've added staff. But fellows often will assist the curatorial team in adding information into the database, running reports, and that kind of stuff. There's often some sort of woodworking that fellows will have an opportunity to work on. We always train our fellows on a lot of different types of equipment, kind of the standard gardening equipment, mowers, blowers, string trimmers, and that kind of stuff. But we also make sure that all of our fellows get some experience operating larger equipment like the Bobcat and the tractors. And in recent years, we've added chainsaw maintenance and use. So our fellows are all now trained in how to use a chainsaw safely. Fellows also get a lot of experience with giving tours and programs. So there are several things that we do in-house. We do what's called Wednesday walkabouts, where the staff all takes turn giving tours to the community. But then fellows can also take advantage of opportunities to give a public program. Occasionally, a fellow will be really interested in something and really want to do a workshop. And in this case, one of our fellows was very interested in mushrooms, and we had to remove an oak tree. And it turns out that we had some branches that just were the right size for doing shiitake mushrooms. So this was his opportunity to lead a staff workshop. We embedded all of these mushrooms with shiitake mushrooms, all of these logs with shiitake mushroom spores. And we go on a lot of trips. We do actually quite a lot of activities as a staff. This was our fellows a couple of years ago out in the Pine Barrens. This was our whole team exploring French Creek a couple of years ago. This was Hershey Park. In addition to all of that, the fellows get an educational stipend, and they can use this stipend for anything that they want, as long as it somehow related to the position, and it's something that they feel is going to improve their learning, their experience, make them better as a professional. So again, we're very lenient with this, and it's completely self-driven. So in addition, and this one's a little bit more vague, but the fellows learn an awful lot just from being in the gardens and working with our plant collections. It feels like every day there's something new that's happening, something new to discover, a different plant that comes into bloom. And so there's sort of immersed in that pretty much every day over the course of the 2 years. So there's a lot of learning that happens just from those experiences in the garden. So with that said, I'd like to introduce you now to Nate Braddock. Nate is our first-year fellow, and he came to us highly recommended with a bachelor's degree in biology and fresh out of an internship at Longwood Gardens. So now I will turn it over to Nate to tell you more about himself and what he's been working on at Jenkins so far.
All right. All right. Thanks for the intro, Steve. Again, I'm Nate Braddock. I'm the first-year fellow here. I started this past May, so I've been here for just over 6 months now. And today I'm just going to share some of my background and my journey to Jenkins, as well as what I've been up to since I've been here. So, I'm from Silver Spring, Maryland, which is right outside of DC. And I grew up going to a lot of the public gardens in the area, like Brookside Gardens and US Botanic Garden in DC. And that just really inspired a love of public gardens and public horticulture in me from a young age. I'm also a big hiker, and I just love being outside and exploring wild areas and national parks. So I'm just overall a huge nature lover, and that is one thing that really attracted me to working in public horticulture. Growing up, I kept a few houseplants, like little cacti, but then over the pandemic, I just really needed a hobby. So I started keeping a lot more houseplants and propagating them on my own. This plant here in the middle is the first plant that I ever propagated from cutting, my syngonium. And keeping houseplants just really opened up a whole new world of plant science to me. And I started teaching myself botany and houseplant horticulture and plant ID to supplement what I was already kind of learning in my biology classes in college. So that brings me to my education. I earned my Bachelor of Science in Biology with a concentration in Ecology and Evolution from Washington College in 2022. I also minored in Art and Art History. The ecology program at my school was a lot more focused on animal ecology and animal behavioral ecology than any kind of plant ecology. So the summer after my junior year, I was working on a research project studying breeding success in grassland birds. And it was a really great experience because it really helped me develop field research skills and writing skills, presentation skills when I was presenting my poster at a poster session. And I got to do some really cool bird banding, just really being up close and personal with these birds. But as I was working out in the grasslands, I found myself being a lot more interested in the plants than the birds. So I kind of took that as a sign that maybe I was not meant for ornithology and I should kind of dive deeper into my interest in plant science. So I just kept on teaching myself more about plants. And by the time I graduated, my research experience combined with my passion and kind of self-taught knowledge for plant science helped me land an internship at Longwood Gardens. So last year, I was a conservation horticulture intern at Longwood Gardens. And that means I spent a lot of my time working with the rare and endangered plant collections in the greenhouse, in the nursery, and even in the tissue culture lab. So I spent a lot of my time working with the Clivia collections. You can see me posing with the Clivia display that I helped set up in the bottom middle picture, and with the native orchid collections. On the right, you can see me hand pollinating some Platanthera orchids in the wild in a bog up near the Poconos. And I really enjoyed getting to work in that kind of collection-based setting. But the most rewarding part of this internship was my individual project, which was all about native wildflower conservation. Specifically, this project was based around an endangered Jacob's ladder species called Polemonium van Bruntii. I think there are only 7 extant populations in Pennsylvania. So it was my task to kind of write a protocol for propagating the seed and growing it on in a greenhouse so that it could be reintroduced to the wild eventually. The project was a big success. You can see in the top right picture, those are 2 full benches of these plants that I propagated. I think I ended up with just under 500 individual plants. And I got to go out in the field and replant them with their original populations. So this project really inspired me to continue working with native plants and native plant conservation. But I wanted more experience working with native plants in the ground, not just kind of isolated from their natural habitats in a greenhouse. So that brought me to Jenkins, which is, besides just being a rhododendron garden, it's also a native plant garden. So as Steve mentioned, a big part of the fellowship is the fellow project. And I started my project over the summer, which is replanting this turf area down by the pond that we call the pond spur. So right now, this is just all turf. It's not really contributing to any wildlife. It's just sitting there. So my goal for this project is to design a new planting that will kind of function as a respite at the bottom of the hill. Maybe there'll be a seating area for people, but mainly I want this design to increase the ecological value of this area by adding native plants to a place where it's just turf right now. And hopefully I can add some new species to this area that are new to the Jenkins collection to increase the biodiversity of the garden's collections. So far in this project, I've done a lot of site analysis, and a big part of that was soil testing. So I conducted a perk test, which is the top left picture, to test the drainage of the area. I conducted a texture test, which is that jar, to examine the soil composition and the different sizes of soil particles present. And I also conducted a nutrient analysis. And I'm taking all this area, or all this data from the soil testing, to figure out what exactly the soil makeup of this area is and what plants will end up growing best here. Another big part of the site analysis was assessing the light conditions of the pond spur. So I spent a whole day just kind of mapping out where the light is hitting different areas of the pond spur, because it is in part shade conditions. So I wanted an idea of which areas are sunnier or shadier, so that I can really include a diverse palette of plants in this project. So this coming winter, now that I've done the site analysis, it's going to be all about compiling a plant list for this project. I am currently just combing through nursery catalogs, and it's been really fun because I'm learning so many new plants. And once I select new plants for this area, I'll move on to actually mapping the pond spur and creating a formal design. And hope, if all goes well, that design will be installed next fall. As well as doing all this kind of more computer-based work, I've just been going out to other gardens in the area and out into wild areas just to search for inspiration, see how plants are growing in the wild and how other gardeners are using these native plants. And that's been one of the most fun parts of the project, is just exploring all the possibilities. So in addition to the fellow project, Steve mentioned the fellows receive an educational stipend while we're here. And I've gotten some really cool opportunities so far through the stipend. So first of all, I've been taking a class through New Directions in the American Landscape on ecology-based landscape practice. So I've been learning land management practices for meadows and woodlands and how I can translate wild spaces to more formal garden designs so that they're more legible to like a broader audience, basically making native plants accessible in a garden space. And I'm really excited to use all this knowledge in designing my own garden for Jenkins. I've also gotten to attend a workshop at Scott Arboretum on the coevolution of plants and pollinators. And that was really interesting because it just opened up a whole new way of categorizing flowers and placing them within the larger ecology of the landscape. And if you haven't lately, just take a second and go out, look at any of the asters that are flowering and maybe spend 10 minutes looking at the pollinators that are visiting them. And it'll just blow your mind to see the diversity of pollinators that are being supported by just the smallest little flower outside. As Steve mentioned, the fellows lead some tours around the Arboretum, and I've gotten to lead the Wednesday walkabouts and a tour for a college group that came. And it's been a great opportunity to practice some teaching skills and educating people on the value of native plants. And then I'm also going to be leading a workshop this spring on bog gardening, which is a big hobby of mine. And I'm really excited to get to share some of the ways that people can include these like weird, not usually seen in the home garden plants into their backyards. So with that, thank you for listening to me. I'm going to turn it over to Liesl now. Liesl Barkman is now the second-year fellow at Jenkins. She came to Jenkins after getting her graduate degree in environmental science. During her time in school, she developed a strong interest in ecology and native plants and how together they can help aid our planet. She will be sharing with you about her fellow project and other experiences as a fellow.
Hi, everyone. Let me pull up my screen here. Okay. Thank you for the intro, Nate. So my name is Liesl. I am now the second-year fellow at Jenkins. And a little bit about me. I grew up, my dad is an arborist, and I've always had a strong interest in nature, being outdoors, going hiking, and I even worked at a nursery when I was in high school. And that interest in just being with plants and outside kind of took me to getting my degree in environmental studies. And then I continued on into a graduate degree for environmental science. And during that time, I was still trying to figure out what I wanted to do. But after I left college, I really realized that I'm passionate about plants, and that's kind of how I found Jenkins. So at Jenkins, my fellow project has kind of had three main components to it. The first piece was monitoring the rain gauges. So I was just trying to get an understanding of how much rain we were getting each time it rained. So I have a rain gauge that's in the forest, pretty dense tree cover, and one that's in a more open area in that Browning hillside that Steve mentioned. And so I can kind of track the rain that we get, and after each time it rains, I just go out and record it. And so then I can see if we've been going through a long period of drought, and that kind of informs the next piece of my project, which is monitoring stormwater erosion. So we have a stream that goes through the lower portion of the property, and for many years it's been slowly eroding. And what we did to track how much the erosion is happening and how quickly, we put out 15 PVC pipes, and we just drilled holes through them. And you can see in this picture, the third one in, we're like hammering nails into the ground to keep them in place. And then about twice a month, I go out and just looking at where the bank was versus where it is now. Sometimes there's no erosion that happens from check to check. And sometimes I see 4+ inches of erosion. So then I can kind of compare the rainfall that we got in that period of time and look at if I'm seeing a lot of erosion happening. So here's the final placement of one of these stormwater gauges. You can see it's pretty clear where erosion is and is not happening. And then here's a few pictures of just my process of, I use a saw to etch the PVC and then mark it with Sharpie, and then I measure it. And here is all the data that I've collected, a little over a year of information. Everywhere that has a green cell is a measurement that is new. So it means on that date, there was new erosion at that marker. And I add little notes in about like a rock that fell out of the bank. And with each check that I do, I also take a lot of pictures. So I've been able to put together like months of pictures, and you can just actively see in some of the areas, you can see the erosion happening. And this is one of the areas that's been really severe. The third component of my project was supposed to be mapping the floodplain with the total station. The idea was that we would go out and catalog all the woody plants. So I did that with Steve this past winter, and we assigned everything a new accession number if it didn't already have one. And then from there, we were going to use this this yellow device is called a total station. And so it shoots a laser and you're able to map a plant, and then that gets put into our mapping database. Unfortunately, we've had a few troubles with getting that up and running. And we've also had a new stormwater project that is probably going to end up changing the way that the floodplain looks. So with that, we've kind of put this piece of the project on hold. But luckily, I had expressed to Steve that I was really interested in also learning about garden design, getting more involved with that. So he kind of assigned me a mini project, which was the bird garden. And so this was on a portion of the non-public portion of the property at Jenkins. It had a lot of invasive vines and just, it was very overrun. It had low ecological value. So we thought that we could kind of restore this area and put in a garden that was directed towards seed-eating birds specifically. And it allowed us to pick plants that might not have the same aesthetic as the public garden normally goes for. So with that, we did some prep. We had a corporate volunteer group come in, and they helped us remove all the vines and move some of these large boulders into place, clearing the whole area for planting. I also got to get some chainsaw experience. There were a few red buds that were severely declining. They were rather old, and they would have eventually died or shaded out the garden. So we ended up taking those out as well. And then once all the plants were selected for the design, Steve ordered them, and the greenhouse volunteers helped us pot up all of those plugs. Once they grew on in the nursery over the summer months, they were ready to be planted. So the third picture over here is all the plants placed out roughly according to that design that was on the previous slide. And here is planting day. So our garden volunteers came out, our regular Thursday volunteers, and we got this garden planted, and then we mulched it and watered everything. And here is the final picture of the bird garden. So hopefully these plants are pretty aggressive. They should spread in and just make a more naturalized look. We were able to add 7 new plants to the collection, and I got a really good feel for what it's like to go through the design process. In addition to the fellow project, as Steve and Nate both mentioned, you get a lot of experience with all different kinds of other things. So I had a strong interest in getting chainsaw experience and learning more about like felling trees and all of that. And so we did a chainsaw workshop where we went through some of the basics of starting and maintaining a chainsaw, safety. We got to go out into the conservation woodlands and go through some of the basics of dropping a tree. We also did a CPR workshop, so I'm now CPR certified. We did a asters and goldenrod walkthrough, so I felt like that was somewhere that I was still kind of lacking on being able to identify the different kind of asters and goldenrods. So we walked around the gardens with a book to key them out and went through some of the key characteristics of all of these different kinds of asters that we have in the garden. And the 4th picture is all the different stages of fern propagation in the greenhouse. So Helen, the greenhouse manager, has been teaching us about different propagation techniques, and this was one of the workshops we did for it. There's all different other kinds of experiences. So the picture on the left is euonymus scale. So we identified that on one of the plants, and I got to see the process of going through the pest management for that, using different like physical, cultural, and chemical controls. And I thought that was really interesting, getting to see the integrated pest management process. Another picture, getting some chainsaw experience. I have gotten a rather decent amount of experience with a pole clip and pole saw. Karen, our head horticulturist, always like takes you through the process of how to do it properly and safely. And the last picture is just an azalea propagation that has been growing in the greenhouse. All these are things that Steve has already mentioned, but that's me and the bobcat learning how to like scoop chips and travel with the bobcat and chips. The picture in the middle is during when we were doing equipment maintenance. So a lot of times you may get experience using equipment, but in the fellowship, I've learned how important it is to also know how to maintain the equipment. Me using a weed whacker, and the final picture is me applicating pesticides. So as a part of this program, I use my fellowship funds to get my pesticide applicator license. I took the Penn State short course for it, and I'm now licensed to do that. And then there's lots of other fun experiences you come through as you're here. So I have really enjoyed doing beekeeping. It has been very informative to learn about them, and you don't really come across that experience very often. We also did maple syrup tapping, so that was an interesting thing that I had never done before. We came across a fawn once on a deer chase, and I never thought I would have that experience. And the last picture here is us putting up the big holiday wreath. And so there's lots of fun, like seasonal things that come up as you're here. So now I would like to introduce Tara. She is the current curatorial assistant at Jenkins, and she's also a graduate student at the University of Pennsylvania. And she was the previous fellow from 2018 to 2020. So I'll hand it over.
Thank you, Liesel.
So as Liesl said, I am the Curatorial Assistant here at Jenkins Arboretum and Gardens. And I was the fellow from 2018 to 2020. And I will speak a little bit on the fellowship and also how it prepared me for my future career. So a little bit of
Tara,
background.
you might just need to share your screen real quick before you get started.
Sounds good.
Yep.
All right.
There you go.
All right. So just a little bit of background for me. I grew up in New Jersey, and so I had a lot of exposure to the outdoors, especially like the coastal areas. I love being outside. I love backpacking. I like being in doing things in all weather conditions. And so I think that that set me up nicely for a career in conservation and horticulture. And so for my undergrad, I went to Brigham Young University, Idaho. It's a small school in Southeast Idaho. And I got a bachelor's of science in horticulture. And one of the best experiences for me as a undergrad student was participating in the National Collegiate Landscape Competition. And so that's a national competition where universities from all over the United States and some Canadian schools as well, they come to an area for a landscaping competition. And so my two competitions that I competed in were houseplant identification and houseplant interior design. And the university I went to, we typically place in the top 3. And so it was a great experience for me. And then after I graduated, I did a few jobs in horticulture, and I landed the fellowship at Jenkins. So as Liesl said, I was the fellow from 2018 to 2020. And the previous presenters have talked about their experience and the benefit to the fellow and the education that we get through that. So I'm not going to go too deep into that. But so my experience, when I first started, I helped, as previous people have mentioned, it's like a fully immersive experience. So you're included in like the planting, some of the designing, propagation, as you can see, and as Liesl has talked about, some beekeeping as well. And I thought it was interesting to see plants go from seed to plant to being planted in the ground. And some other experiences I had was leading workshops. One particular one that I enjoyed was a macrame workshop in the greenhouse. And so participants were able to bring in their houseplants, and we just had a morning of just macrameing and getting to know each other. And as Liesl mentioned, we have a lot of different seasonal tasks. And so the middle picture is, again, part of the giant holiday wreath that goes up annually. And also some work in the greenhouse or with the greenhouse volunteers, which is the picture on the right. My fellow project was planting outside of the deer exclusion fence in the main entrance to the garden. And so that gave me some experience in design. And one thing I had to be really mindful about were the conditions and the deer. We have this area, as a lot of us know, is like heavily populated with deer, and so we wanted to make sure that we were planting things that would be able to survive. And as previously mentioned before, we are allowed an educational stipend, and so one of the best things that I think I've done for my career was go to what's called the Smoky Mountain Wildflower Pilgrimage. And I think it was timed really nicely. I had a full year at Jenkins. I was introduced to the native plants of the area, as well as some of the conditions of the eastern United States. Because my education was out in Idaho, so it's a very different climate. I was gardening in Zone 4. And so my second year in the spring of 2019, I went to the Smoky Mountain Wildflower Pilgrimage, and which is about a 3-day, it's kind of like a conference where you can sign up for different walks, different courses. And so I chose a lot of the wildflower walks, and we walked around with experts in the area, and they talked about the ecology of the land and how it's changed and how that influences the ecosystem, and also about like the future outlook on how the landscape is going to change. And so I fell in love with the Smokies. I grew up going as a kid, and so it was nice to see it with different eyes. And also, as part of my educational stipend, I use a portion of it to help cover a wetland ecology class at the University of Pennsylvania. So as a fellow, I applied to the University of Pennsylvania as a post-baccalaureate student. I was accepted, and I was able to enroll in this wetland ecology class. And so again, it was learning about the wetlands of the Pennsylvania and New Jersey areas, everything from the coastal plains to bogs and fens. And it was fun. We were on the water, we were kayaking, and this is really where I fell in love with field research and field work. And so after my fellowship ended in 2020. I had lots of interviews. I had several job offers, but a lot of them were rescinded in spring 2020 because of the pandemic. And the first institution to reach back out was Chanticleer. And at the end of the fellowship, I knew that I wanted to have a role in ecology and conservation. Chanticleer, it was really close to home. And when I interviewed, they were really impressed with the background that I had in heavy equipment. So the use of the Bobcat, for example. And so I was part of the grounds crew and part of the horticulture crew. And my favorite area to work in was the Bell's Woods at Chanticleer, and that's where they highlight a lot of native plants and naturalistic landscaping. And then of course, Chanticleer is such a beautiful garden. I was happy to work everywhere there, but especially in the cut flower and the vegetable garden, I thought was really fun. And then while I was working at Chanticleer, Longwood reached out because I interviewed with them in spring 2020, and Longwood reached out in the fall of 2020 and said that I was the original pick for one of their positions, and that position no longer existed, but they invited me to interview for a land stewardship and ecology position in the research and conservation department. And so for a while I was working, that was a part-time position. So for a while I was working part-time at Longwood and part-time at Chanticleer. And at Longwood I was able to, I gained a lot of different skills, including I am a certified wildlands firefighter now. I learned about vernal pools and all things, a lot of things conservation. And Jenkins really set me up really well. They wanted somebody who was familiar with pesticide applications, and they preferred somebody with a pesticide applicator license. And so so for Chanticleer and Longwood, they both were really impressed with the background that I had from Jenkins. And I think one of my favorite parts of working at Longwood was being one of the two plant I was one of the two people who chose the plants for this display of the flower show. So the theme was habitat, and so I had a background in again because of Jenkins, I had a background with native plants and some design, and so I thought that it was a really unique experience and something that that Jenkins provided the foundation for. And so also while I was at Longwood, I decided to enroll at the University of Pennsylvania as a official master's student. So I'm currently there working on a master's of environmental science. And I am learning about different, so it's a master's of environmental science with a concentration in biology. And so I've taken classes ranging from soil science to ornithology to regional field ecology. And my thesis is with rhododendron that's thought to be endemic to the Smoky Mountains National Park. And when I entered the program, I knew that I wanted to work in the Smokies. And so I reached out to the research coordinator. I sent my my resume and gave a little bit of background about myself. And I was surprised when I heard back saying that they had a project in mind. So the research coordinator saw that I worked at Jenkins and that I had a background with rhododendrons, because Jenkins has a nationally accredited rhododendron rhododendron collection. And so there was a paper that was recently published that described a new species, but they wanted to know a little bit more about it. And so I started field work for that project. And the project is with this species called Rhododendron smokianum. And so the original paper that described this species, it used DNA from one population of one one plant from one population. And so the park they wanted a more comprehensive analysis of the species. And so I went to the 27 known locations and found a few additional locations and took tissue sample to isolate the DNA to have a better understanding and just a more comprehensive analysis of the species. And so I went to the Auburn University at Montgomery, and there Dr. Kelling and her lab, they specialize in rhododendron DNA isolation. And so I was able to travel down there and learn specific techniques to isolate rhododendrons. And again, this interest came from my experience at Jenkins. And while I was, so in 2022, I started at Jenkins back again as a curatorial assistant. And my role here currently is it's a lot of plant records, and so I manage a database, and every plant is accessioned, and it's cataloged and it's mapped, and so I work a lot in our mapping program and our database. And one of my favorite parts of the job is some of the plant exploration that we do. And this for the past
2 years, I've gone on a trip to the Southern Appalachians in June to look at mainly rhododendron calendulaceum and some rhododendron pinophyllum, but it's to support our germplasm repository project at the Arboretum, and we look for unique specimens and take cuttings of those to preserve. And so Steve and I have gone, and we have a system where we collect the data, the GPS points, collect cuttings, and then we brought them back to the Arboretum so that they can be propagated and grown on to be one day added to our collection. And during my time in school and at the Arboretum, I applied to the Chanticleer Scholarship to help support some of the projects that I'm working on, mainly my research at the University of Pennsylvania. And I also used it to travel to the American Rhododendron Society and American Azalea Society National Convention that was held in Atlanta this past year. And I also went to Atlanta Botanic Garden and met with some of their conservation staff. And so while at the American Rhododendron Society and the Azalea Society of America National Convention, I was exposed to a lot of interesting azaleas as well as a different ecosystem. So the two pictures on the right are from a high mountain bog in Georgia. While I was there, I was also, I was asked to present a poster at the convention as well. And so I presented on rhododendron smokianum. And I was also asked to be on a panel. So this is a panel of researchers who are doing research in rhododendrons in some form. Some people are doing pollinator research. Some are doing different taxonomic ranking and nomenclature research. And so for the future, I feel like Jenkins has really set me up to be able to explore my passions, and I've definitely found a love for conservation and horticulture and azaleas and rhododendrons. And so I plan to stay an active participant with Jenkins one way or another, but I also know that Jenkins has provided the foundation for a successful career. So thank you.
Thank you, Tara. All right, so don't run away too quick, Tara. I'll ask you guys all to actually unmute and come back on video, and we will start our questions. So those of you out in the audience, if you have specific questions for specific people, feel free to ask those, or if you have more general questions for the panel to discuss, happy to take those as well. And while you're thinking of questions, I thought maybe, Steve, I might ask you to talk a little bit about, I know we keep saying that the fellowship is immersive, and I think people definitely got to see that as far as working in the garden and the different aspects. But Steve, would you be able to talk a little bit about the housing scenario, since it really is immersive on site?
Yeah, so it's a pretty unique opportunity to not just work in the garden, but to also live on the garden, or live in the garden. So I do know that some other arboreta, some other gardens do offer staff housing. A lot of the time, though, the staff housing you have to pay for. But Jenkins offers free housing to most of the horticulture staff, including both of our fellows. It's a pretty good perk, especially here where we are located on the main line of Philadelphia. Rent is very, very high. So I feel like that's a significant benefit to the program. And it's really nice to not have a commute. You can just walk out the door and jump in a golf cart and drive to work every morning. So that's pretty nice too. And again, like you're sort of immersed in this garden and this experience for 2 years. And I feel like that's part of the experience, is actually living on site. The housing is not in the public garden though. It's on the property, but it's not attached to the public area.
Great, thanks, Steve. Again, if those of you out there have any questions for our group, feel free to type those in. But maybe I'll just have everyone, I know you guys talked about a lot of different aspects of your fellowships. And Steve, I'm not sure if you actually said it out loud that you were a former fellow. So you're all technically able to answer this, but I thought maybe you could go around and talk about maybe the most surprising part of the fellowship for you. Who wants to start?
I don't mind starting.
Great.
So the fellowship is significantly different now than it was when I was a fellow. When we started really implementing a lot of these academic components, it was around 2014. I was a fellow from 2009 to 2011. So my role here was largely just as a horticulturist, as a gardener. That's not to say that we did nothing educational. You know, as I mentioned, you're immersed in this collection, you're immersed in these gardens, so there's always something to learn. I think the thing that was the most exciting to me about the fellowship was one of the things that was most exciting to Tara. Is I also went to the Smoky Mountain Wildflower Pilgrimage. And I had an interest in native plants before I came to Jenkins. You know, Jenkins helped sort of solidify that interest. But having that experience, which was only made possible by the stipend that you get, that was really a game changer for me. I think I spent 4 or 5 days in the Smokies just walking around. And if you've not been there, it's hard to describe, but it's like all of the plants that we have here, that we cultivate here in the garden, but not just 3 or 4 or 5. It's like whole mountainsides of these amazing spring blooming wildflowers. And it was just an incredible experience. I had no idea what to expect. And I came back from that experience. I actually went to our director at the time and kind of begged him to figure out a way to keep me here after the fellowship. Obviously, he did that.
Anyone else want to share their surprising?
I'll go ahead.
Surprising part. Great.
Something that I loved about the fellowship and something that surprised me was I think it's unique that it's 2 years. And so I felt like I learned a lot the first year, but the second year is where everything was reinforced. And so I think that having the opportunity to be here in all the seasons, multiple different times, that was I was surprised by how much more I learned and how much more it was reinforced.
I'll just piggyback on that. I would agree with that. I feel like you learn a lot, but last year I feel like I was learning new plants altogether and just like taking in the whole experience. And this year I can kind of fine tune the things that I want to learn. I've talked a lot to Steve about how I want to like expand my like knowledge of scientific names and that kind of stuff. And I feel like this program has just really pushed that forward.
I'd say I've been most surprised so far just by how quickly I've been learning things, being like fully immersed in Jenkins, because like Steve was saying, we live here, we work here, we're in the garden every day, surrounded by this really diverse collection. So every day I'm basically learning a new technique or a new plant. And it's just within 6 months, I picked up so much already.
Great. Thanks for all of your answers. And we did get one thing popped up in the Q&A was just a clarification, Steve, for you that living on site would be mandatory for the fellowship.
That's correct.
All right. Oh. All All right. So I'm just going to read this out loud, and Steve, I'm going to first put it to you and we'll see if anyone else wants to chime in. But do prospective fellows need to have a background in forestry, public gardening, or landscaping? I'm currently an undergraduate student studying horticulture with a focus on plant and crop science, but I have an interest in more ecological topics. Do you have any recommendations?
So the short answer is no, you don't have to have that background. Of course, it's always nice to have some of that background, but in some cases you can almost sort of be overqualified if you have too much of that background, because as I mentioned, I feel like that is the whole point of the fellowship, is to have younger people that are interested in horticulture that might not know exactly what direction they want to go, come into the program and figure that kind of stuff out while they're here. So it sounds like that background would fit very well with the fellowship.
Agreed. All right. So I'll give the audience one last minute to think about questions, but while that's happening, I'm just going to mention something that has happened for us recently. So we actually have a name change for this program. It has been enacted as of just a few days ago. So we have formally changed the name of the program from Hamilton Educational Fellowship to Hamilton Horticulture Apprenticeship. And in making this change, we feel it more accurately describes the duties and experiences outlined in the job position. And the name is the only thing that will be changing. The content of the program will remain the same. So we just wanted to alert everyone who is joining us today. We will be making a more formal change over the next few weeks, but we did create a new web page and have a new application form that is up and ready. So I'm going to actually go ahead and put our new web page, not whole website. I'm going to throw that in the chat here. If my cursor will go. There we go. Just give me 1 second. I'm working just a few different computers. Here we go. All right, so I'm going to throw that in the chat so everyone can see that. So again, our new webpage for the apprenticeship program is our main website, which is www.jenkinsarboretum.org, and then apprenticeship. So hopefully those of you out there will be able to check that out and get more information. We tried to make it informational as well as links back to a lot of the things that our fellows get into, which is everything from writing articles and leading walks and different videos that have been produced about their projects and articles in our magazine, as well as a lot of information about the bulk of the apprenticeship, which is a lot of landscape management for Jenkins, as well as many other things that have been described today. So it might take us a while to learn the new vernacular, right? To move on from fellows to apprentices and the apprenticeship, but we're excited for the change. And I think that it not only, it just more accurately describes what the program has grown into. And hopefully that'll benefit everyone who goes into the program from here on out. So let's see if there's any other final questions. There's just lots of kudos to all of you saying what an interesting and informative symposium this was today. So thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you to our audience for joining us. And we will have the recording ready, be able to share that and also add that to the webpage for resources as well. So thanks to everyone, and hopefully we'll connect with you at Jenkins sometime again soon. All right. Bye, everybody.